When children see ghosts, what's a parent to do? Moms and dads ask themselves, does my child possess unique gifts, or is my kid possessed? Will this be a one-time, quote, weird event, or is my child destined to be haunted for life? Does my child need psychological help or some kind of meds? Should I believe what my child reports, even if I don't believe in ghosts? These are the kinds of questions that parents are asking about very special gifted children. And tonight we're going to be talking with expert author Dr. Caron Goode on her new book, just released, Kids Who See Ghosts, How to Guide Them Through Fear. She's going to be joining me tonight, taking your calls. We are live. And if you have questions about something your child is experiencing, if you want to know, is my child one of these indigo children? What does that even mean? My child tells me that they're seeing something before they go to bed at night, which is very, very common. And we're going to be talking with her about her suggestions on how to deal with these kinds of things. And when kids report ghost sightings, parents' reactions may range from feeling paralyzed with fear to being curious and supportive. And if their children are scared by encounters with the spirit world, parents naturally fret about how to best help their kids through this fear. This new book has reached #1 in both the United States and Canada very quickly in 3 different topics on Amazon.com within 2 days. And it is very quickly spreading, and it wouldn't doubt me if Caron sees it on the New York Times bestseller list. Hi, Caron. Welcome so much.
Hey, I like that vision. Thank you. Glad to
well,
be
we know
here.
We are setting our intention, right?
You bet.
I have to tell everybody listening, Caron and I met in a strange and wonderful way. She contacted me and she interviewed me for the book and my personal interviews in the book, and I ended up contributing a chapter on kids and dreaming, and it became kind of a personal venture of my own getting into this story as well. But I have to say, Caron, your enthusiasm and your wonderful natural ability to just talk about this topic in a way that is gentle and loving and opens people up to this topic without being weird or woo-woo or scaring people is just brilliant. So I'm so glad to have you here tonight. So why don't you just tell everybody listening briefly how you got into this topic? What made this come about to turn it into a book?
Well, I was starting a blog in 2009. Hillary called Raising Intuitive Children for a book that a co-author and I did. She had 4 intuitive children, and we had all met so many different parents in our venues and coaching that when this book came out, everybody said, okay, you've written a book, let's do a blog, right? Got to do a blog. Never done one. And I found it very hard to write 300 words after writing a 250-page book. So my husband said, look, why don't you watch this Psychic Kids Who See Ghosts show on television, and maybe you can comment on that. So I did. My first blog entry happened to be the same night as the show. And we got 20,000 hits within 2 weeks, and we started getting comments and questions on the blog from parents who were very scared, very frightened. My kid won't sleep in his room. My 18-year-old just told me that he's been talking to ghosts for 4 years. What am I supposed to do? My 13-year-old, talks with an angel, somebody else, he's a demon, and all of these questions just kept coming for a year, and I just decided to put them all in a book because, why my particular website that happened to have a comment about the show. And boom, here we are a year later, and really people are so grateful for this information.
Yeah, they really are. Now, have you had this experience yourself as a child?
I did have this experience as a child, and of course, being raised in a good Irish Catholic family, my experience was in seeing saints. And I actually saw my mother's father. I call him Grandpa John, but he died when my mother was young, so I didn't even know who he was until my grandmother pulled out some family pictures and showed me. So I did have these incidences, and I didn't really remember them until later. I happened to come home from college and was packing up my room, and I saw my mother's Catholic newspaper laying on a kitchen cabinet, and there was an article about the monk, Padre Pio, who was under investigation for canonization as a saint, he had died. And I looked at his picture, and I had seen him when I was a child. In fact, that story's in the book. But a lot of this came running back to me in my early 20s. Then I turned it off and came right back in my 30s. And so like a lot of parents that I've been talking to, you know, we can't turn it off, and the children who come to their kids from their kids' bedrooms and into mom and dad's room really wake up. A lot of parents' intuitions and apparitions and things that they saw when they were kids.
Yeah. So is it common then for parents to, you know, really worry about psychological issues when children start to have these kind of experiences? Is that what you find is most common for parents?
Well, in the parents that I address in this book, you know, those that are scared for their kids or don't know what to do, really care and want to educate themselves, they are frightened. And sometimes it really is a genuine fear, just like their child is fearful, because they actually feel something, and they don't know what it is. And their first instinct is to protect their child, so their fear comes up. Other parents have general anxiety about it. It's like, what do I do? What do I do? You know, how do I handle this one? Tantrums I know about. Potty training, I can read a book. But what do I do when my kid won't go into his room for 3 months because there's something there that I can't see?
Yeah, it's not exactly in one of the Pregnancy 101, you know, books to be
everything you wanted to know.
How to deal with kids and seeing things.
You got it.
Well, you know, I always think of these stories where, you know, the boogeyman, you know, I mean, this has been around, you know, for generations, and how kids, I think that, do you think that, well, I personally think that they have, but do you think that kids have been experiencing this since the beginning of time? This is not something that's newly coming to light. It's something that's always been there.
Yeah, I would agree with you completely. I think intuitive children have always been around, and I think a subset of that group has always had some connection. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these kind of stories. In fact, I remember a time when I shared a bedroom with my 3 sisters in this little house that we all grew up in, 6 kids. And I remember hearing somebody outside my bedroom window. And I closed all the shutters and the curtains, and I still heard someone outside my window. And I got up and refused to go back to bed. And my parents actually went out with a flashlight, finally, because I wouldn't go to bed until they went and checked. And they did find footprints. But, you know, something like that scared me. And I had nightmares after that forever. But if they hadn't believed me, I don't know where they were going to put me, because I wasn't going back to my bedroom. Mm-hmm. And that's how the children feel. The fear is so visceral that it's terrorizing. And I don't know if parents even realize that it's that gut gripping.
Yeah, unless they've experienced it themselves. And I think that those parents who have or have somebody good relation to be they're at least a little more aware. Now, what has been your experience in talking to parents and dealing with these questions that come in as far as medication goes? I mean, what's your opinion on that when parents have these kind of experiences and they put their child on medication? You know, the effects. What do you think about? I mean, I know what I think about the effects are, and I'm not for that, but I'm just curious.
No, I'm not for medication if there's any other possible way to help children. And there's a lot of possible ways to help children that are very simple, that are in all of my books. In fact, if you read my book, somebody will say, you know, you talk about the same thing in every book. It's like teaching children how to take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Using the power of touch and bonding to soothe the child and calm them down. So if somebody's really acting out and they're really scared, we've got to calm them down before we even know if medication is appropriate. And, yes, a medical doctor or a mental health professional really, you know, isn't supposed to even give credence to go, so of course they're going to suggest that. And it will dim or dull the creativity in the child. Yes, it quiets the brain. Yes, it may get away from, quote, what these hallucinations might be in their judgment. But we've also turned the child into kind of a zombie. You know, there's a very flat emotional affect, and all the creativity and the music in the head and the books they wanted to write, you know, it's gone. I'm talking with a 12-year-old right now sometimes about these ghosts that she sees, and she could write a character description for a play because she knows everything about them. Now, I haven't investigated it enough to know what she really sees. Her mom is fine with her active imagination, but we do have it channeled into an outlet of writing in a diary and taking the characters that she calls her ghosts and writing it out. Now, if there was no support at home and if she was put on medication, she would just be very flat and dull. And instead, I'm listening to this vibrant, bubbly 12-year-old who's so full of life and so full of imagination. And until, you know, I really find out what's going on deeper levels through our talking, I just enjoy her stories, and she'll tell me, you know, what this character did and what that character lived through. And it reminds me very much, to be honest with you, of your stories of seeing ghosts as children, and Brad Steiger having grown up on a home that was built over an old stagecoach stop. And when he and his sister went to bed at night, you know, all the ghosts came out, and they thought it was normal till they went to public high school. So, you know,
that's usually the case.
You want to kill that, you know? I mean, I was reading Brad Steiger's books 20 years ago, and, you know, to have the honor of interviewing him in the book and to have the honor of your story and children working with dreams and your experiences from your childhood, I mean, this is an honor to me. These stories are inspiring for parents, very inspiring. Look,
yeah,
we're
I think
all normal, aren't we?
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, thank you for that. It took a while for me to get used to being able to really come out and talk about that stuff. And you mentioned hitting high school, and the whole thing kind of crashes. But it's, in a sense, that's what's happened. That's what happens to a lot of people. They get into these spaces where, you know, they think everybody else experiences these things. They don't know any different. And then when they have a conversation with somebody else who says, "What?" and they kind of look at you crazy, you kind of shut up. You kind of internalize it, and you don't really seek out that connection as much as you probably would have if that response had been different. And I think that's exactly one of the key messages that you really did a wonderful job of getting through with all the people that, you know, were a part of your book. Everybody contributed to this, that if parents' reactions to these children are different, more open, more supportive, then you don't have that initial shutdown. You know, there's this shutdown that happens, and it's so subtle. I mean, I went through it. It's just a very subtle shutdown on the outside, but on the inside, it's a dramatic reality shift. You just you start to fear your own things, you know, what you're seeing, what you're not. You don't want to really talk about it because then you fear being different and being outcast by people or getting in trouble even. I mean, some parents get angry about, you know, these kinds of stories. I didn't have that happen so much in my life, but it was definitely something that they didn't want to talk about. My parents just didn't want to talk about it because it was something that was so out of their realm of experience that they just didn't know what to do. And I think that's very common. And so anyway, we're taking calls tonight. So if you have a story about a child in your life, your own, or somebody you know that you'd like to share with us, we would love to hear it. And if you have a question for Dr. Goode, we would be happy to take your questions on the air. Or you can send me an in-quick message right on the Achieve Radio homepage, and we'd be happy to take your questions that way too. Caron, what was your most eye-opening experience with this book? What really kind of startled you the most out of all of the, you know, all the stories, all the facts, all the things? What was so new to you in this book that you may not have encountered before?
You know, I think it was two things. One was, it was the story of Dorian Fisher in the book, where she was told she'd never give birth. She was on fertility drugs, and she read a book that made her go back and believe in herself again and not to believe all the medical stuff. And anyway, her two children are both highly intuitive. And in the beginning, it frightened her when they were younger. And, you know, her comment to me was, there was a point when I had to make the decision that, you know, this was who I was going to be as a mother of two psychic children who see things and talk to things, and, you know, and she realized, you know, that's who she was going to be the rest of her life. And that was kind of a powerful story. It made another mother call in from San Francisco and say, thank you. I know why my 3-year-old is so weird. And it's like, is she weird? Yeah, she really is, but it's okay now, you know. The other thing that astounded me, Hillary, was that the professionals that I had contacted, psychotherapists, et cetera, people that I felt would have an interest in discussing some of their cases and how they helped parents deal with their kids seeing ghosts, would not speak with me. If they thought that it was an academic paper and I did not put in the fact that I had, quote, seen a ghost, unquote, they might have spoken with me, but they all backed off very quickly.
Really?
And,
Yeah, I said, really? Wow. I'm kind of surprised about that. Yeah.
So it's interesting, and professionally, they couldn't put any kind of story on the line or have their name be used. And I interviewed a medical doctor about his use of intuition in his practice. And in the end, I didn't use it because I couldn't use his name, and I didn't want to risk that sort of aspect in this profession. So that was kind of like, you know, I guess I am way out here on a limb on the fringe of my own profession. But then I meet professionals like myself all the time who use intuition, who have seen spirits or had precognitive dreams when they were teens. So to me, it's still very routine. But out there in the big world, it's still a topic that nobody wants to talk about, Hillary.
I think that's just so amazing. It really just blows my mind that in now, you know, today's world, we just still have so many asleep people. And I say that with great respect. I'm not trying to insult anybody out there, but it just amazes me. I have to share something with you, Caron. My son Anthony, him and I were having a conversation on the way to school a few weeks back after this whole BP oil spill started. And he says to me, he goes, you know, Mom, I don't know, you know, I'm really concerned about this. And he really just had this kind of defeated look on his face. And he said, I don't know what I can do and what's going to happen to the oceans and what's going to happen to my planet when I grow up. And you know, that's like a 10-minute drive to his school. And then I said, you know, you can do something about it. And he goes, well, I don't think so. No, who's going to listen to me? I'm just a kid. And so anyway, he goes to school, and I encouraged him to talk to his teacher about maybe doing a project or, you know, writing letters or something. And then, you know, within a couple of days, Anthony and I sat down and we started a website called KidsSavingThePlanet.com. And we did a YouTube video, one YouTube video, and he was so happy to, and we created a Facebook page, you know, a community page. And so every time somebody added, you know, themselves or they joined or they commented, his eyes would light up a little bit and his ears would perk up a little bit. He'd be like, wow, people really do care what I have to say. And we just found out today, actually, that they used his YouTube clip, and CBS National News did a big story on kids who were, you know,
that's wonderful.
I know, rallying around, speaking up, making signs and doing these kind of things to get people's awareness that, you know, they really are concerned about something like this, because they're the ones that have to inherit all of this and take care of the everlasting problems from it. And he watched it tonight right before the show, actually, you know, an hour or so before the show. And he just couldn't believe that he was in a news clip with Obama and, you know, the CEO of BP and other kids and some other, you know, it was just really showed him how much he can really do and manifest. And I think kids, it's just an example. Well, I'm a proud mother, I have to say. I'm telling that story on the air because I'm proud too. You know, but but what was wonderful from my perspective too was to show how a child can take an idea like a seed and do something with it and go out into the world, and it can reach other people. And I think the same thing can happen to the psychic phenomena with children. It's like, if they realize with the right support that this is okay and it's normal to have these kind of experiences, then who knows where it's going to go? Who knows what kind of, what's going to manifest out of that when they both parents or parents involved with helping to just encourage some kind of positive outcome. Writing dream journals or, I talked about that in the book, but, any kind of fun activity, making dreaming conversations, in the morning around the breakfast table and, seeing how much they could remember actually helps to foster that, dreaming ability and stuff. And I just really wish that a lot of people would get that it really does matter what you teach a child. It's not just about eating right, watching the right shows, and all this other stuff. It's about belief systems, too. I don't know.
Yeah, it's about responsiveness, too. It's about responsiveness.
Yeah. So what are some steps that you think, if a parent, when somebody comes to you and says, my child is experiencing this, and this, what kind of advice do you generally give out to people who come to you?
It's really the most common sense stuff for the very frightened parents or frightened kids. The younger the children, the more you truly have to calm them down and, help them regulate that gripping gut, okay? So a massage or a hug or a hot bath or a distraction for a while, listening to music, there's got to be something that every mom knows, that helps their kid become calmer. And then, whether they draw, whether they act it out, I really ask parents to have a sense of humor about it, because this can be fun for children. And it's got to be fun, or it's got to be acceptable to be empowered by it. Otherwise, they're going to be scared of their environment all of their life. So PMH Atwater has a story in there about a father who was tired of his sons complaining about the ghost in the bathroom. He wouldn't go to the bathroom upstairs. And the father just said something like, take care of it, kid. I'm tired of hearing about it, which sounds maybe not so responsive. But the little boy, after complaining about it, did go get a baseball bat out of his closet and went into the bathroom and got rid of the ghost, okay? So what if you made that fun? What if you bought pirate hats and fake swords and mom and kid went into, or dad and son went into the bedroom and scared the ghost away? For little kids, you get a shoebox and you put the ghost to bed. If the ghost won't leave and you want the child to sleep in the room, then give the ghost a place to live and tuck it away in the closet for the night. I mean, it's things that are common sense, because for children, play is normal. Being scared is not normal. So if a parent is lighthearted and humorous about it, or if, a mom shared with me the other day on the phone that her twins would not run up the stairs and go to the bathroom or the bedroom at night because there was a ghost, and they did live in a haunted house. So she would be the one to charge up the stairs first, and then they would run after her, and it was a game. And so that's the kind of lighthearted creativity that you need to have as a parent, because if you're scared, the child will never, go back in that room. You've got to help them go back in there.
Now, what about the presences that aren't good? I mean, not every entity that a person encounters is positive or of the light. So what would you suggest to people who really feel that it might be a negative influence? How would you know? What would the child be experiencing? And what would you suggest the parent would do?
Well, I think in the case of something really negative or ominous, it's not only the kid that feels it. I usually get a report that the parent feels it too, or the house has been chilly, or there's a change in the atmosphere of the home. So I would definitely suggest they get help and clear it. There are some suggestions about clearing away energies in the book, and that's, to me, just as important as starting a meetup group. If somebody feels by themselves in one part of the country and doesn't have any anybody to talk to about it. Start a meetup group, and if nobody shows up, you go home, but eventually people will. So for the scary stuff, that to me is something that they need to talk about with somebody else. So maybe they call you, maybe they call me, maybe they start a meetup group to talk about the haunted house in the area. A woman in Tucson did that. So it's a matter of communication, but it's also a matter of keeping the houses as warm and comfortable and cozy as possible. And there are ways to do the clearing.
Yeah, because there's been a bunch of books written on like entities, non-physical entities, and how it affects people. They don't usually go into the kid arena, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't be just as attracted. It's almost like the ghosts are attracted to the kids. Don't you think so?
I see that
do you think
more so. Yeah, I do.
Why is that?
And sometimes I ask kids, I said, well, why do you think that ghost came to you? Mm-hmm. And they'll say, oh, I wanted to help, or, oh, I had a bad day and I wasn't feeling too good. I mean, sometimes they can tell you from the pit of their stomach, what the real feeling is.
Yeah. And so do you think that most ghosts are coming to these kids to communicate something to the child because the child is more in tune intuitively than most adults are?
In the general number of cases that I see, yes, I think that's true. I think the ghosts are coming to the children because the children, or let's put it this way, Sonia Choquette had a different way to view it. She said that children who are seeing ghosts don't have boundaries, that they're like water, very fluid. And so it's not that ghosts come to them, it's maybe that they go to the ghost. They enter into that realm of consciousness when their brain waves shift, okay? That's another way to look at it. So what is the child seeing? Why are they why is the ghost attracted to them? Those are some of the questions that I think parents need to ask. Well, why do you think this little girl came to see you? Why do you think that you're seeing our doggie, who just passed over? That kind of thing.
Caron, do you think that because of where we are in the world today and the times that we're going into, that these kind of phenomena are increasing?
I think the phenomena are increasing not only because of the energy that you've often talked about with Barbara Hand Clow and those changes, but let's look at what's happening in the media, because I liken ghosts in this decade to what ETs and abductions were in the 80s and early 90s. If you look at the 80s, you had Starman and ET and movies and television, and suddenly Whitley Strieber comes out with Communion and it sells 1 million copies. And people like me who were starting a therapy practice suddenly get somebody who says, I had an abduction. I'd like to talk about it. I want to see if it's real. I want to explore what happened. And all of a sudden there's this whole group of sub-therapies going on, okay? And it's because if the consciousness of mankind opens to that, and then suddenly people are remembering those archetypes or those personal experiences, the same thing's happening here. In the book, I interviewed Michael Mendoza, and he makes the statement, well, where do the ghosts come from? Are they really somebody that died? Are they memories of the child's own soul history or genetic history? I mean, those are valid questions. So I do think as the planet changes and our immune system shifts and our nervous systems are becoming more refined and more sensitive, I think we're going to have a ton of this phenomena. Just watch the next 5 years.
Yeah, because
I think it's going to go out of proportion.
Yeah, you mentioned Barbara Hand Clow's show. We have spoken with her often, and one of the things that she talks about quite frequently is this, timeline of coming up to 2012 and beyond, not just about 2012, but these alignments that are happening in the energy that's coming onto the planet as a scientific fact. It's not just, some new age kind of theory. It's a scientific fact that things have changed, that, there's more sunspot activity. We have a lot of things coming onto this planet that, are shifting realities and shifting dimensions. And, as these shift, I think that we're going to see we're going to see an increase in contact or communication in a variety of different ways, because I liked how he asked that question, where do they come from? Are they just the spirit of deceased people? I don't believe that. I think that it's a combination. It's like a soup pot. I relate it to being
I would agree. And let's see a child, let's say your son, sees something in his room that scares him. Why not turn that attention to something positive within the spiritual or religious framework? Why not call in an angel? We had those shows too, right?
Yeah.
Look at Saving Grace and Earl. I mean, I like Earl. He's pretty good. In other words, you got all the negative, phenomenalistic stuff on TV, but you also have the opposite, and it's all the same. It's beings from other dimensional frequencies that we can see and feel and touch. And if a parent is scared and a child is scared, then turn that fear to find an internal wizard, a voice of wisdom inside the child, even if it looks like a power totem, or a tiger or a jaguar or something. That's what I think this training, if you will, in helping people deal with this kind of phenomena is something fun and something familiar and something lighthearted. And if it's scary, then, take care of it. Don't sit and wonder what it is and think about, what can I do? Get out.
It reminds me of Harry Potter. When Harry Potter, I think, was such a big hit because he was able to turn and transmute all this darkness that was coming in at him. I was really kind of surprised how dark the movies were, but they made a lot of sense in how he overcame that darkness and was able to magically transform it into something else. And I really believe that that's why it was so successful, because it touched that part of us, that inner wizard, inner magic,
Yeah. He's one of the most empowered kids we all know.
Yeah, I'd say so. We have a question from Mark in Fort Myers, Florida. Mark asks, he said, I would love to help children who are psychic. I was a psychic kid, but there was absolutely no support for being gifted when I was growing up. I'm looking at creating a Psychic Kids Workshop conference and would love some ideas or feedback on making this possible. That's a great idea. I think that there's a TV show, but I don't think that there's ever been any kind of, has there been any kind of conference?
Yeah.
So what would be your advice to
ideas, huh? Well, we can look at intuitive intelligence as a normal temperament that 1/4 of the population has, and out of people who know how to use their body, like in sports, we can also say we have this group of highly intuitive people who have connections to other dimensional frequencies. How do they use their gifts? What are they seeing? Is the paranormal really paranormal, or is it normal? I mean, transpersonal psychologists study the inner and the subjective and the objective world. So I think we have to look at honoring the subjective experiences, how to speak about that, how to share how parents deal with it, and maybe intuitive training that's focused on helping children turn their energy on or off, turning their radio in a way that they can deal with their radar. So maybe it's just, how to deal with your radar, your whole intuitive frequency that you can pick up and feel and see.
Yeah, you're going to be starting a series of workshops, aren't you, actually, that it's associated with the books? Oh, by the way, for people listening, if you're interested in buying a copy of Caron's new book, you can go to kidswhoseekghosts.com, and there's a whole bunch of wonderful bonus offers. When you buy a copy, you can go in and pick from a very wonderful selection of people who have helped with this project and support this project. So, again, that's kidswhoseekghosts.com. So you are going to be doing a series of workshops with this new book, correct?
I have thought about it, and that's as far as I've gotten. I wanted to put together a series of webinars.
Yeah.
And because the book just launched last week, I haven't even spoken with individuals about doing it. But yes, that's an idea, a very strong idea. I wanted to make it global. Maybe
that's a great idea. That's a great idea, Caron. I think that would be something that would be really, I must have picked up on that. Sorry. Side effect.
Yeah, you did. Not by accident.
I'm hoping that we're going to get a couple more questions. And Mark, if you wanted to be more specific with your question, you can certainly give us maybe some more idea of what you're looking to do, and also share some of your own experience. So, Caron, where do you go from this? Once you read this kind of book, what do you think you're going to be branching out onto as far as topic matter from here?
I think the next book is something about the shift in perception. On the basic level, I think it's you're tuned in, you have a giant radar. How do you read it? How do you read the sensory impressions that are coming into your body? How do you filter them, and what do you do with it? In other words, I know that kids see ghosts, but people have near-death experiences. People have transformative peak experiences. You know all of this. Mm-hmm. So the point is, why do we have them? And the point is, if it's all a brainwave state, I want to connect the dots between it's a biochemical issue and it's still a subjective experiences that changes people's lives and opens them up to the other dimensions. And once that's open, you don't turn it off. How do you live with all of it? See, that's kind of the therapy I used to do. A mother, driving a truck along an icy New Hampshire road, slips into one of the lakes, accidentally, and she sees light. And yes, we all have these experiences, but it doesn't mean necessarily that it's a spiritual transformation. But the light touched her. She had no concept of light. And so what was it? What did it mean to her? That's a very loose definition of where I'm headed, but it's the importance of these shifts in perceptions, and it's the idea of how to make it happen to be able to touch the inner core of that being and live that way here in a very unbalanced time.
Mm.
Makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And so for people listening, I'm sure some questions they might have would be, why do some kids have the ability to make contact and others don't seem to?
That's a great question, Hillary, and the answer is as simple as I know. Over the years, most of the children I've dealt with have intuitive intelligence as their gift. Somebody else might be a musical genius, okay? Somebody else might be a mathematics genius. They're very cognitive. Think about a doer, a really active physical child who loves snowboarding and skateboarding, and their temperament is different. The wiring is different. And to me, intuitive children and adults feel their way through the world. They're not particularly visual or auditory as their strength. They're feelers. And the feelers is what we haven't been giving any attention to in schools and in psychotherapy. How do you feel? It's like, oh, that's ugly, that's dirty, turn it off, don't tell me. So we've got a subset of this population of very sensitive, intuitive children. And to me, they see it. Now, the kids that aren't that sensitive and have appearances now and then, it happens because kids are stressed out. And they get overstressed, and the adrenals pump to the temporal lobes, and the temporal lobes get active in forming images. So, we can explain a one-time thing, but the children who see it consistently and it's part of their everyday life and personality, that's definitely, I think, hardwired in.
Yeah, I'm listening to your words, and it just makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. Do you care to comment on the contribution of popular media and its effect on kids who see ghosts?
Sure. I'm laughing because I get mostly questions from 12 and 13-year-olds, both male and female, and the questions are, I can't see ghosts, but I want to help. I want to be a ghost whisperer. What can I do? Can you teach me? It's like, well, if you don't see them, I probably can't go help you find them right now. But, the ghost whisperer by far in the audience that ask me questions or that come to my blogs, she's had the most impact on making it a profession and a business acceptable and fun. and that has opened a tremendous number of doors. I don't get a lot of questions about ghost hunting except general impressions like anybody would, but the Ghost Whisperer show has caught children and turned their heads around to make them want to help.
I think that's great. I think that also encourages them to to foster and nurture that ability, don't you? I think once we seek out our intuition, we end up finding it. If we've lost some kind of disconnection to it, it's always a part of us that we can find and give life back to if it's for some reason shriveled out of our life. Now, in your book, you include both the skeptic's view and the psychic's view in the same book, which I liked and I thought was interesting. Why did you choose to do that?
Well, I'll tell you, I wasn't going to include it, except Joe Nickel made the best sense to me because when I didn't have a lot of the professional type of people that I had originally invited when this book was proposed to the publisher, there was a skeptic and professional parents and psychics and all of that. But he said one thing that made a lot of sense to me, and I think it gives parents permission to not believe in ghosts if they don't. We want them to believe in their child, okay? But Joe said, look, if there's a door in front of you and you think you're going to go into that room and do some ghost hunting, so you don't, what if the door says the ladies' room? You're just going to barge into the house because you already have this preconceived notion that ghosts exist, and you're going to go in to prove your thesis. Okay, that's all right. But he says, what if you stood outside the door and didn't believe in ghosts and simply went in for the pure subjective experience of feeling what's there and knowing what's there? And that's actually not uncommon in some of the exercises that I've done in transpersonal psychology or in shamanic work. So he gives parents permission to not believe in ghosts if they don't want to. And he gives parents permission, to have a conversation with their child and say, you don't need to believe this, and if you don't want this to be part of your life, then you don't have to have it. So it offsets the rah-rah-rah of the rest of the book, and I think it gives balance.
Yeah.
That's why I included it.
I like that view of that choice, and I think you'll reach a lot of people having those two perspectives. Now, PMH Atwater, she mentions that children who have near-death experiences and kids who see ghosts are similar. How so?
Yeah, that was a very interesting research she did. What she found was that children before the age of 6 who had some sort of dissociative experience or connection to the other side, so to speak, had overdeveloped temporal lobes or bigger temporal lobes, the temporal lobes on the side of the brain where your temples are. And they're part of the psychic connection in the brain, active psychic centers. In other words, they also tend to be active and bigger in people who've had, a lot of paranormal experiences or, say, UFO-type experiences. So in her book, when she was comparing the indigo children to her population of children she interviewed and had medical studies on, she found them to have larger temporal lobes. And she wondered if this was not part of the brain's adaptation to this day and time or to their internal experiences. And I thought that was a valid point.
So another one of the thoughts that have gone through my mind is when parents are handling these kind of things that their children go through, what happens when it happens at 3:00 in the morning and they kind of like waking up with a newborn and you're kind of drowsy and you're walking into this whole thing. How do they handle that kind of situation when a child wakes up either from some kind of nightmare or, from having an experience that might seem to be paranormal? How do you differentiate between the two?
Well, that's a good question because I do get that a lot. Night terrors typically come in cycles where the child wakes up about 2 hours after you've put them to bed, and they don't quite, as they go into that deeper REM sleep, something, either they're not breathing correctly or they're wiring their nervousness, their anxiety, or just their sleep patterns alone tend to not have them go into that deep sleep. So they have these hypnagogic images and they're startled awake, much like somebody who feels like they're falling into their body and bounce on their bed and wake up, you know. And so the children are frightened, and there's a very specific way medically to treat that, where you wake the child up every 2 hours, and then, you know, you do that 3 or 4 times a night, and then they go back to sleep, and eventually they'll go into the deeper sleep and get the rest they need. But they never quite get the rest. I think the difference with a child who sees a ghost at 3 in the morning is there is a definite presence in the room that they point to, and they can tell you specifically what they see, or the feeling that they're not going back in there because they're wide awake and their adrenaline is pumping is different than a child who's still in a kind of a sleepy haze and seeing those images. You know, we call them hypnagogic images before you go to sleep at night. Your mind kind of shoots pictures at you. And that's all a normal part of the sleeping and dreaming state.
Now, you're also author of 12 other books, and with most recently being Kids Who See Ghosts, but you've also authored the award-winning Raising Intuitive Children, Help Kids Cope with Stress and Trauma, and The Art and Science of Coaching Parents. So you have a wide range of experience and expertise in these topics when it comes to psychological aspects of dealing with kids. Now, I'm wondering, when a child is under a lot of stress or has been through, some kind of trauma, whether it's, domestic issues or, school issues, do you find that sometimes maybe these things might be projected into these kind of experiences?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where a mental health person comes in, or talking with somebody who's trained in the field or who has dealt with children like this. But dissociation, in fact, there's a story in the book about a girl called Lucy whose parents, after they were divorced, lived in separate apartments. And Lucy wakes up one night at her dad's house and sees a ghost, and the ghost follows her back to her mom's house. And, Mom comes to talk to me because, am I hurting my child? What about the divorce? Does she need medication, antidepressants? And the parents were really good. Lucy could describe this ghost as a child a little older than she was, who said that she died in a car accident with her parents. I mean, we got the whole story. And the parents agreed to keep journals of her behavior, and her behavior was fine. She didn't get lower grades. She still did her homework. She went to school. She was moodier a little bit, but not depressed. And she spent more time in her room, but not abnormally so. And Mom, occasionally listened to the conversations. And Lucy shared her diary. And after about 1.5 years, Lucy and the ghost said goodbye to each other. So Lucy thinks she was helping the ghost. The ghost thinks she's there helping Lucy. Did Lucy make her up? I don't know. It's a real toss-up. For 1.5 years, would she have made her up? It's possible. On the other hand, was it a ghost? This is a case that's a very fine line. But you get it a lot. If a child's been in trauma and there's an angel appears that helps them, there's a ton of stories out there like that. I really believe that angels help kids. Why not a ghost that's attracted to the child or that the child attracts to them? It's a toss-up.
For those of you listening, I'm speaking with Dr. Caron Goode, author of Kids Who See Ghosts. For more information about her book, you can go to her website, kidswhoseeghosts.com. Dr. Goode graduated with a doctoral degree from George Washington University in 1983 and is a licensed psychotherapist. She completed postdoctoral certifications in wellness and women's spirituality at the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology. And in addition, she holds the title of National Certified Counselor and Diplomat of the American Psychotherapy Association. So you have a really strong background in these things. And what I really personally like, Caron, is that you are tackling a topic that I think a lot of academic people usually stay away from and really don't want to touch. And and it would jeopardize their standing. And I was married to a university professor in another life, in my earlier years. And I saw what was required of him and the publishing that he had to do and the grant money that he had to bring in. And he was very active and at the top of his field.
And, you know, all I ever wanted to do was teach at a university. That's why I got my doctorate. At the time I graduated, there was no money. I applied for 300 jobs, and Reagan had just cut educational funds. And it was a disaster. So, you know, my path is never what I thought it would be. So I have the freedom to do this and to have fun with it and work with it without the rigors of the institutions that others, you know, have to be governed by, because that's their job.
Well, yeah, and I still think that it's very refreshing that somebody with your background can come out and tackle a topic like this. Now, you have an active blog on kidswhoseghosts.com where people can actively submit questions to you or interact with you, right? We
do. We have Intuitive Parenting. That's a very active blog on this topic, and Kids Who See Ghosts blog is gearing up too. And yes, we get questions. I answer them as best I can, provide more information, and most of that information is also in the book.
So you need to get a copy, everybody listening. I love bringing people on who write all these books, and I feel like I'm always constantly trying to sell books to people who are listening to my shows. But the message that comes through the work that you do and other people like yourself do is so important, and I really endorse the message, and I endorse the work that you're doing, and, you know, on a higher level also. I think you're waking a lot of people up, and I think that it's time, and we need it. People are so asleep. It's like walking around in zombie land sometimes. It's really disheartening, but I think it's changing, and I see more and more people coming to terms with, you know, the reality that maybe life isn't so, you know, perfectly delivered to them in the way that they thought it was.
Yeah, I agree.
So in the last minute or so, Caron, what is your message when you talk into the phone and your message is going across the airwaves? What is your hope and intent of your work right now? What is your message for the world?
What I would like parents to know is to simply believe their kids, even if they don't believe in ghosts. And situations like these call for acceptance. Just to accept their child, observe the situation, and then move ahead with whatever action their family and values, portend. But just to believe and to accept. And if they can do that, they won't emotionally shut their children down.
And we'll have a whole new generation of people that will be awake and in touch with themselves and their hearts and their feelings. What a wonderful thought. And from, you know, your lips to God's ears, I hope it happens, and I hope it happens quick, because we really need it. So everybody listening, I want to just take a moment to say thank you. Caron, thank you so much for joining me on the air and for, you know, for being a part of my life in the way that you are. And it's really been an honor to work with you. So thank you for taking time out to join us tonight.
Thank you, Hillary. I feel deeply also.
Everybody listening, I just want to say tonight, listen to your hearts and just, you know, follow your intuition and go out into the world and pursue your dreams and live life to the highest and to the best of your ability. It's really all we can do, and support one another. And when someone tells you they love you, tell them back. You know, reach out and start changing the world one person at a time, one heart at a time, and then we can really start to make a difference just by being our true selves and coming from a place of love. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Hillary Raimo. Namaste.